Hello, everyone. With the newest Avengers movie, Endgame, coming out, I figured it would be a good idea to go through and rank the MCU movies and see which one I find to be the best, all the way down to the worst. But I'm not alone because that would be boring. So, we're going to have two different points of view on this at least and rank our MCU movies from worst to best. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, so number 21, because we will not be including Endgame in this, because even though it's right here, it's too soon to rank it, even after seeing it. So you're going to have to let it sit for a while and let it digest. So, to me, the absolute worst MCU movie, the bottom of the barrel, number 21, is Thor: The Dark World.
Ouch.
What do you have as the bottom?
My absolute bottom of the barrel, scraping it out, making sure you get anything that's left, would have to be The Incredible Hulk.
Okay, I can see that, but we'll talk about mine first. The reason I think Thor: The Dark World is the worst Marvel movie is because it is the only one in which at any point while watching it I fell asleep. I kid you not. I was watching it at home on DVD and I fell asleep for a good half an hour or more.
I was going to remove that as evidence because it was anecdotal, but then I realized you put in the DVD, you made the choice to watch it, and you still fell asleep. So.
Exactly. That is exactly what happened. And it's not my fault, I think. I will not personally attack the director, but he made some questionable choices as the movie went on. Namely, just look at the color palette, if you could call it that, because there's about, 3 shades of brown in the whole movie, and that's all you get. There's barely any color in it.
Looks like someone had a charcoal set, and that's all they used for the whole thing.
It's funny you say that because the credits, the theatrical looking credits, actually look like drawings of charcoal. So yes, that's probably how they did it.
They finally revealed their true purpose once they got to the credits.
Yes, and the human side characters. Jane is brought in because of her connection to the ether and everything. That's fine, but the other human side characters are useless in the movie, and they're forced to do comedy that doesn't work. It's not funny, and it doesn't flow with their character, and it just doesn't work at all. And the Warriors 3 are barely in it at all, much less than the first movie. Hogan literally just hangs out in Vanaheim for the entirety of the movie. He's not even on Asgard.
Right.
And then there's one of the worst MCU villains. Like, I love Christopher Eccleston. I mean, he's Doctor Who. Like, he's good. He's good as an actor, but he was wasted in this movie. And Malekith is one of the most forgettable MCU villains to date. Even though he could have destroyed the entire universe, nobody cared. They didn't even call the Avengers because it wasn't that big a deal.
I can't disagree with you there. And Malekith and the Dark Elves in general are, they're about as bland as their facial features are. They're not worth much, and I'm glad to see them go.
Yeah, you should be, because they're not coming back. I mean, there are some cool things in the movie, but they just get drowned out by this slog of, having to do what is expected of everyone. You expect these grand Shakespearean-like instances with Thor and everything, but it's just, everything falls flat. And literally, the only reason I would ever say anyone should watch Thor: The Dark World is because it has an Infinity Stone. The Ether is the Reality Stone, and that is literally the only reason why you should ever rewatch this movie or watch it for the first time if you've never seen the MCU somehow.
And that's not a redeeming quality.
No, it's
Just,
not.
You have to see this so you'll understand something else.
Yeah, and the post-credit scene reveals the Collector and the Guardians world, I guess, is something. But if your post-credit scene is the biggest reason to watch your movie, you're doing something wrong. Any more thoughts on Thor: The Dark World, or I guess we can talk about it when we get to that on your list. But why do you think the
That's
Incredible
true.
Hulk is that bad?
Well, as you said with Thor: The Dark World, there's really no reason to go back and watch it except that it has an Infinity Stone, and the Incredible Hulk doesn't even get that blessing. So there's literally no reason to go back and watch it. I felt kind of bad putting it this low because I thought, well, I probably haven't seen the movie in 10 years, and then I thought, well, that's why. I didn't want to see the movie ever again. It wasn't interesting. Of course, there's really no tie-in. It might as well be a DC film as far as the disconnect goes from the rest of the series.
Ooh, ouch.
So different actor, different everything, and just doesn't flow well with the rest of the Marvel series. So it's not a good movie in general, not enjoyable to watch, and not a good Marvel movie because it doesn't fit in.
Whew. Shots fired. Although I don't know too many people that'll come running to the defense of the movie.
I don't either. And if they do, maybe General Ross, maybe he's a fan, but other than him, I don't see anyone having this in their top 10, let alone their top 20.
That's true. Doesn't even crack the top 20.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So, speaking of the top 20, number 20 on my list is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Volume 2 is very important. Don't scream at me yet. What do you have for the 20 spot?
Well, there won't be too much to say because my 20 is Thor: The Dark World, which is why I couldn't really disagree with you when you were bashing it so hard because I had it right there. So,
well, any other thoughts on why it's so bad?
No, it just is that bad.
It really is. I understand why they veered off from that in later films, but man, it's not
I will
good.
make one more comment on the tone, the color tone of the whole movie. They used as a backdrop England, known for its dreariness in the first place, and then the world of the Dark Elves, which realm is that?
Svartalheim.
Svartalheim. So in Svartalheim, they might as well be in London as well because it's the same dreary backdrop. So they just go from one dreary setting to the next. Really doesn't do anything to help them.
Yeah. So Thor: The Dark World, terrible movie.
Terrible.
Glad we established that.
20 or 21. It's awful.
The reason I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 this low is because, listen, when I first watched the movie, I loved it. I mean, I had a great time. It was a great laugh. And, I enjoyed what I saw, all the bright colors and everything. But watching it again, there's a lot of, like I said with Thor: The Dark World, there's a lot of forced comedy in it, especially Drax. I mean, they pretty much changed Drax's whole character. Because in the first one, he just, didn't get sarcasm. And that's what was funny about him. But then they just changed what he was all about in the second one. And to me, it didn't capture the same magic as the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Because in the first one, you have this team, and then they have to come together, even though they don't like each other all that much. And then in the second one, you have this team, and they have to come together, even though they don't like each other all that much. Nobody learned anything from the last movie. Everyone's still a jerk to each other, and everyone still doesn't know where they belong or anything like that. And, the whole thing with Quill and Ego and him having magical powers or something, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me. And I don't know. What do you think of the Guardians movie?
Well, I've got a couple issues with it, same as you, and we'll see it coming up shortly on my list, so we won't have much disagreement there. But one thing, and you already kind of mentioned this, is Drax changes character, but he becomes far less mature. In the first one, he's at least concerned about his family that has been brutally slain and all of that issue that he has. But then in the second one, he becomes a 12-year-old, it would appear, and he loses a lot of any admirable qualities he had. And the same thing is true for Groot in the second one. Groot was this majestic, kingly figure in the first one that he might not have had that much depth as a character, but you still got to appreciate him. And now he's literally an angsty teen. And that doesn't do anything to help the bonding of the team as a whole.
Well, I will say he doesn't get the teen until the end of the movie. He's the little baby for most of it. But I do agree on the regression of the character that happens pretty much across the board. And um, really, they have a lot of subplots in that movie that go nowhere, seemingly. Most of which being the sovereign people, which were the gold people at the beginning, and then they chased them throughout the movie. And their only reason to be there is to have a bunch of ships to fight, it seems, and or to have Adam Warlock in a post-credit scene. And we don't know of when he's coming into the MCU, so it could be another 10 years or more.
Could be another phase entirely.
Yeah, it could be until Phase 5 or 6.
Right.
Although, the way things are going, we could have Guardians 3 in Phase 5 or 6, but...
Right. So possibly a sequel could enhance the status of this movie as far as it tying in, but otherwise there's not going to be much to save it.
Right. So, number 19 for me is The Incredible Hulk.
Okay.
Number 19 for you is...
Number 19 for me is Iron Man 3.
Okay. I'll just touch on The Incredible Hulk because you already talked about it a bit.
It's trash.
Yeah, the reason I put it above those other two was because it does have some connection to other films. I know it's hard to remember because you haven't seen it in so long and it's not that great, but like Blonsky has injections of the super soldier serum, same thing that Cap had, or a deviant of it because the original formula was lost and all that. And so they did their best to recreate it. And so Ross gives him some of the super soldier serum. And that's why he can fight the Hulk and everything. And then that combined with the gamma blood turns him into the Abomination. And just other things like that. Like General Ross, as a whole, he comes back in the MCU later as the same actor and everything. So, yes, the whole thing with Banner isn't that great. Edward Norton is... his interpretation of Banner was fine, but it drastically different than Mark Ruffalo's version of Banner. So the fact that it is still considered in the same continuity is a little iffy to me. But I don't think it's I don't think it's great by any means, but it's not the worst to me. Like, it's passable. And but that being said, I understand why they haven't had another Hulk movie since then, and why he's more of a team player nowadays.
If he can ever turn back into the Hulk, that is.
Well, that's true, but we'll see.
Yeah, we're still waiting on that.
So, what do you think of Iron Man 3?
Obviously not very highly. Iron Man 3, easily the worst of the Iron Man movies, although some might agree or disagree and say 2 as far as Iron Man goes. But Iron Man 3 is forgettable, and the misleading villain was, for me, a letdown more than anything, because you had what was going to be, from the trailers and from the commercials, you see, okay, we're finally going to get this really interesting, really mystic villain with Iron Man, and then we don't. And we get... who is it again? AIM somebody, another one-off villain. Great. I was really hoping for that.
Right.
What I was also hoping for is to have this movie take place and have drastic changes in Tony Stark's life, where he gets rid of his 158 different suits that he has, and then for him to magically have more the next movie. Because nothing that actually happened mattered in the world of the MCU. It was localized to that movie.
Okay, yeah. I can't really disagree. Mostly because in my number 18 slot, I have Iron Man 3.
Wow.
What do you have for 18?
For me, 18 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Okay, well, the bottom seems to be pretty lined up, necessarily, but... for Iron Man 3, I will completely agree. It didn't really have any lasting changes in the film. You could literally skip Iron Man 3 and not miss a beat. because he gets the arc reactor taken out, but that doesn't matter because he still wears them in all the suits. He blows up his suits, but he still has them later, and even builds an Iron Legion of robots that help them out. But I guess since he's not in the suit, it doesn't count somehow with Pepper. Yeah, the Mandarin as a villain, I didn't. The twist is kind of a letdown to me. I wasn't enraged like some people were, but just the way that they were building him up, he was set to be a really great villain. And I know that there's technically like seeds out there of like, oh, he wasn't the real Mandarin or whatever, but they haven't revisited it since then, and it's been since 2013 that this movie came out. So I don't think they're going to come back to it. And like you said, they had the mysticism aspect of it, but I guess they were too afraid to do it back then, even though they have Doctor Strange now and everything, and it would totally work and be just fine.
Right.
But yeah, Iron Man 3 just you don't need to watch it. Nothing really happened. I mean, it's fun. I had laughs. There's some good action, like the Air Force One sequence where he has to rescue all those people. There's some good parts to it, but it just doesn't live up to a lot of the other MCU films, and certainly doesn't impact them in as much of a big way. So, what are your thoughts on Guardians 2?
Guardians 2, similar to what you said, well, of course, the same as what I already said. Guardians 2 should have been a much grander movie. The first one was a little bit more, but up to that point, we'd been a lot more focused on Earth. You'd been to Asgard, you'd been different places, but this was going to be a really out-of-this-world experience, except even though you had a living planet, it still didn't feel like a grand scale. It still felt just like a very small, encapsulated film that it didn't reach out as much as it could, I guess.
You know, that's a fair point, that even though they were on a quote-unquote living planet, they saw very little of it in its entirety. And then even the other people that weren't there were in a forest shipwreck, and then they were bouncing around all those different gateways or portals or however many jumps it is. I don't know what warp drive they use in the Marvel Universe, but they seem to enjoy using it for hijinks instead of actually getting places. So, we are in uncharted territory now because we have all brand new movies to talk about. The bottom 4 on the list have all been discussed by both parties. So, on number 17, I have Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Interesting. Because for number 17, I have Ant-Man, the original.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. Well, why don't you go first then?
Okay, since I am the original. Ant-Man. Ant-Man was a good story. I will grant you that. But it didn't have a lot of good interplay, except for him and his friend. That was maybe the best we got to see of that. Overall, it was maybe not what I wanted from an Ant-Man movie, not as much so as the sequel would have been. Of course, there might be some disagreement with that.
We'll see.
Depending on who you ask. But for me, Ant-Man, I know maybe it's because it was an origin story. Maybe that's the issue I have with it, because for Ant-Man, I wanted to see him as a competent superhero, but he was more of a bumbling, sometimes hero at best. And he still hasn't developed into the full kind of hero that I am looking for, but that's just me.
Okay. I can see that, because that certainly does carry over to my movie, Ant-Man 2, where, as you said, he's not per se a developed hero, but, I mean, looking at it, he's not had that much experience, especially considering in Ant-Man and the Wasp, he's been under house arrest for 2 years. But I will say that I absolutely loved the Wasp in this movie. I thought she was great, and she is a wonderful crime fighter. She's much better at it than Ant-Man is. And there are some good, funny things in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I didn't dislike the movie at all, but, when I look at it as a whole, there are a lot of things going on. They have that like black arms dealer guy that's trying to chase them and get the lab. They have the ghost who's after them, but she's not actually all that evil. So maybe we need to help her, but she's still attacking us. And then they have Lawrence Fishburne, who's double crosses them, but they have to rescue Janet from the quantum realm, and it's on a ticking clock, and all this is going on, and they're trying to juggle all these things, and none of them are coming together. None of them are making a story. They're just at odds with one another. Like one story thread will literally stop so that another one can move on, and they don't ever cross paths or anything until Janet magically heals the ghost from all of her ailments or whatever. I mean, that's not how you make a movie, if you ask me. So I enjoyed the movie Ant-Man and the Wasp. It was a fun ride, but it doesn't make as much sense to me as the first Ant-Man or a lot of these other Marvel movies, which is why I just had to put it a little bit lower than some of the others. But it's not. I don't dislike it.
Which I guess we are getting into the realm of movies that we don't necessarily dislike. I do have to say the bottom four, as you have already witnessed, are objectively the worst based on two separate lists.
Right, so it's got to be fact.
Right, of course. But then the rest of them, they're not bad. None of them are bad. In fact, the rest of them are good movies, and I don't dislike any of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just from here on out, we're going from that was a good movie to phenomenal movie at the top.
Correct. Okay. Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Okay, so number 16. What do you have?
For number 16, I have Thor. The original Thor.
Okay, interesting.
Yes.
For number 16, I have Age of Ultron.
Okay.
I know that might sound weird to some people because I did a whole video about how it's not that bad, but as we just said, it doesn't mean that it's a bad movie that it's here on this list. It just means that there are a lot of other movies that are really, really good. So, what do you have to say about Thor?
I don't have a lot to say about Thor because Thor doesn't have a lot to say for itself, which this is something that's been discussed not under microphone. But Thor and its sequel were the opposite of lighthearted, whatever that is. Nothing was ever allowed to be anything but serious, and there were jokes. They felt a little forced. But Thor was a very dry character in the first movie, and even in the Avengers movie as well. But he's improved a lot since then, but in the original, not that great. The storyline of the first movie is okay, but maybe a little odd for Thor, because you've got frost giants and you've got Loki. You've always got Loki, and then you've got the Destroyer, but they all kind of fulfill separate roles, but they're all tied together. Maybe just for me, it seems a little disjointed.
Okay, I could see that, I suppose. For me, Age of Ultron, it's a decent movie, and it's got a lot of important things that happen in it, as I've said in a different video. That there are numerous things that not only connect back, but also forward into the MCU. Like, this is our first introduction to Wakanda, and this is where we get like full confirmation of the different Infinity Stones that we've seen up until this point. And so it's really digging into the fact that these are important and this is going to have lasting consequences. And in the next Avengers movie, it does exactly that. So while some people will say, if you watch the Avengers movies only altogether, that Age of Ultron wouldn't fit as well, but go back and watch it and it will fit in as a trilogy. Sure, Ultron is himself kind of a diversion from that, but I mean, even that, Ultron was created to protect the Earth from alien invasion, like in the first Avengers movie, and what subsequently happened again later. So had Ultron worked like he was supposed to, then it definitely would have flowed as a workable trilogy, and or just however many Avengers movies will come down the line.
That was pretty positive. So I guess we are entering the realm of things that are better than they are.
Well,
not
we
as
said that in
good.
the last entry, but
Right.
okay. That was in defense of Age of Ultron, but the reason it's this low on the list is because I can see that there are problems with the movie. One of which being the fact that Joss Whedon was quote unquote broken by the process of making this movie, and he had to step away for a while. We just kind of broke him in general, and Quicksilver's in that movie. In case you forgot, because I'm sure most people did. He died. Spoiler
I remember
alert.
that part.
Yeah, didn't see that coming. No, totally did. He wasn't that important to the plot. He was very expendable, and so they expended him, if that's a phrase. But Ultron, it doesn't flow that well as a movie by itself. I just made a pitch about how it flows as a trilogy, but if you watch it as a standalone movie, it doesn't work. And people have said the same about Infinity War, too. It doesn't work as a standalone movie, and they're right. But I'm in no way saying that Age of Ultron comes close to Infinity War because of just the way that things were handled and the way that storylines overlap and everything. It's just kind of a mess in Ultron. And you can see that, but you can also look at all the other things that connect into the other movies, and it can be salvageable to me. So, we'll move on to number 15, at which I have Ant-Man, the original.
Okay, so again, not too far off. For me, 15 is Guardians of the Galaxy, the original.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. All right. I'll start with Ant-Man since we already talked about it a bit. The reason I like it better than the first one is just because, like I said about Ant-Man and the Wasp, it's got all those weird storylines that don't connect at all, and then it's got all those different problems as a movie. But the first Ant-Man has a very coherent plot. They have this one job that they have to pull to stop Cross from selling the Yellow Jacket suit and giving it to Hydra or other people that'll misuse it. And so the whole movie is about the setup for this one heist and learning how to use the Ant-Man suit and the powers and controlling the ants and all that sort of thing. And that is, in my opinion, deftly woven into how, Hope's mom was disappeared and all that happens with Hank. And you said you wanted an Ant-Man that knew what he was doing, and we had that with Hank back in the day, even though we just didn't get to see that.
Right.
And so Scott Lang is, he's like the new one. He's, to cross the streams for a minute, he's like the Wally West to the Barry Allen when Wally West took over as the Flash. He's not quite as experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But, and in the first Ant-Man, I felt that the side characters were better utilized and better folded into the story. Like his convict friends, I felt like they were utilized better and funnier, in my opinion, in the first Ant-Man, because it's a very workable comedy as well. Not that the second one didn't have jokes and wasn't funny, but again, I think the first one just edged it out a little bit.
That's fair. That is fair. Even though, I'm still not to Ant-Man and the Wasp yet on my list, but we will look at that when we come to it. For me, with the original Guardians of the Galaxy, I have to say, when I first saw it, and I'm not going to complain about the movie because it wasn't bad, but when I first saw it, it was very much refreshing after the however many superhero movies we'd had before that, and I'm not down on superhero movies at all, but it was a complete change of pace from what we'd gotten before. It was very much funny, it was very much lighthearted, and had even though there were some heavy moments, certainly, in the movie, but we got a lot more of a change of pace. I think the music, for me, more than anything, made the movie exceptionally good.
It has a great soundtrack.
It does. And other movies, they have soundtracks, and I like the main theme for the Avengers, but it's not music from the 1970s and 80s. There's just something different about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, really refreshing in that way. Only things I don't like, even though it was immediately refreshing, it might not ages well for me. If I go back and watch it, it is some of the things that they do or some of the places they go, it seems like they're just doing it for the sake of doing it or being weird for the sake of being weird with things.
You're talking about Howard the Duck?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, certainly. But the Collector, just the different, and Nowhere as a whole, they just tried to go a little out there, which I just said with the other one, that they needed to get more out there. So I don't know. Maybe I'm contradicting myself there. And then the same thing that I have for the second one is still true for the first one, which is that the humor in it is a little lowbrow overall compared to the humor used in some of the others. But at the same time, some of the humor is more refreshing. So,
okay. When you first said Guardians of the Galaxy at this spot, I wasn't sure what you were talking about, but you made your case pretty well. So, on to number 14. I have, some people will disagree with this, but I have Thor Ragnarok.
That's interesting because on number 14, I also have Thor Ragnarok.
Really?
Yes. So okay. I would not disagree with you there.
Well, all right. Let's dig into Ragnarok.
All right.
Why do you have it at this spot?
Well, because it's not in the top 10. We're still outside of that top 10 range.
True.
But it's still one of the better out of the top 10 movies. And it really is. I like a lot of things about it. I thought it was refreshing. Mentioned a bit ago that Thor was kind of a stick in the mud for the first two movies, and finally we get to see a little bit more of Thor. And the use of Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin is kind of a coming out party for Thor as well, same way that it was for Guardians, using some different music to kind of tell you, okay, we're not taking this movie as seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I have it up here above all those other ones, because I did enjoy it. It was refreshing, as you said, especially after what I think is the worst MCU film, to have the next one in that franchise be so much more fun and have more lightheartedness to it. It was a great change of pace. That being said, I do think they overcorrected on Ragnarok, which is why I don't have it higher on this list. There are so many jokes in the movie, and yes, they are hilarious. But to me, rewatching a comedy is never as good as rewatching just an action-adventure movie. Because I know what the jokes are, I know what's coming. Some of them I laugh at every single time because they're that hilarious. But others I'm like, yeah, okay, time for this joke. And to me, a big problem that they had in the movie was undercutting serious moments with jokes. There are about 2 serious moments in the movie that I can think of that worked on their own. To me, that was when Hulk transformed back into Banner after seeing the message from Black Widow. There wasn't a joke after that. It was, it's tugged at the heartstrings for me. And then the other one was when Loki touches Valkyrie and she sees a flashback of Hela killing all of the Valkyries. There's no joke after that, and it plays as a serious moment. And I loved both of those moments in the movie. I just wish that it had allowed more of that. You know, when Asgard is being destroyed, Korg makes a joke about it. It could have been a serious moment, but they decided not to. And to me, that's also part of the thing. I know that we just talked about how Thor was kind of, boring, and all of his mythology people weren't into as much, but I'll admit I was that guy that while watching the movie, I'm like, they cannot kill off the Warriors 3 like that. Fandral, Volstagg, and Hogan deserve better. And then other people are sitting here like, yeah, I couldn't tell you their names at all. And that's fine, I get that, but to just dismiss everything that came before so out of hand, like, oh, nobody cares about this anyway. Well, some people did. I cared about it some. I mean, they could have... I've said it before, but I would have preferred if they had died on that first mission in the movie when Thor was talking to Surtur. I would have preferred Surtur kill the Warriors 3 than to them just be, dismissed out of hand and murdered by Hela like it was nothing.
Agreed on all of those points. Which, it's kind of 2 movies in one, which is a good thing in some ways. It's a good Thor movie. It's a solid Thor movie, but it's also a good Planet Hulk movie.
Oh, yeah.
It's really you get two main characters throughout most of it, and that's really nice because otherwise we don't get a lot of Hulk, as aside from being a team player, like you said earlier. So that part was good. It could have had more Valkyrie in it for introducing her, and I know they still can use her and are planning to, it seems like, but they could have expounded on that a little bit more. I agree with the Warriors 3. They went out like Tony's old suits. I mean, they just tossed them aside. It was pretty sad. But that being said, Ragnarok itself, that was pretty cool to watch all of Asgard be destroyed. I thought it was well done. I thought it was well done that it wasn't just Hela by herself that destroyed all of Asgard, because that wouldn't have really made sense. But I thought it was a good work overall.
Yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoyed watching it in the theater, but just coming home from it, I was like, well, did they do that? I mean, could they have done that better? And anytime you leave a movie with that thought in your head, it can't be in your top 10. So, moving on to number 13, which I know will be different because mine is Thor, the first one.
I also know it will be different because mine is Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Ah,
Yes.
finally caught up.
Yep.
Okay, so you talked about the first Thor already, and I have it much higher than you do, obviously, but I really enjoyed that first Thor movie. A lot of people say the first Guardians of the Galaxy was the first time that Marvel did something so outlandish, and they say either that or Ant-Man was the time where it's like, well, Marvel can do anything. But no, the first Thor movie is really where they broke ground on the unexpected. Because you asked the layperson back in 2011 what Thor was all about, and they wouldn't know. They might be able to tell you about the Norse god in general, but they wouldn't know he was a Marvel character connected to the Hulk. I mean, unless they watched that old special about, the TV show that had back in the 70s or whatever.
Which
but,
they didn't.
No, they didn't. So I liked the first Thor better. I thought the Earth storyline worked with Thor because, back in the day, he was stuck on Earth for a long time in the comics, and so I thought that was a good thing. I thought Coulson being in the movie was another great connection to the Iron Man films, and, Hawkeye had his first cameo in that movie before the Avengers came out, and I just enjoyed all of the lore and everything that they put into it with the Bifrost and all that sort of thing. And I did initially have it higher on my list, but, and is clearly demonstrated by the other person on this list, Thor is the last MCU movie, to me, that I can look at it and say, I understand why you disliked this movie. To me, Thor is pretty much the last MCU movie where I can say, I get why you don't like it. I like it a lot, but I can understand if you don't. None of the other movies after this, if you dislike them, I have no idea why. I'll just be honest. You can leave a comment if you want, but I can understand why you wouldn't like Thor.
Fair. I agree, of course, on that, because I'm not the biggest fan of that. I do have to say, if I take myself back and put myself after having just seen that movie, or maybe right before, I can't agree with that point of it was a question of, well, everything they've done up to this point has been very believable, very true to life, and then you go off and it's a god. And you're thinking, okay, well, how are they going to do that? But they pulled it off pretty well. So.
Absolutely.
All right. So for me, Avengers: Age of Ultron. Not too much more to add to it. It was a solid movie, even though people look back at it and maybe don't have the highest regard for it. But it did do a lot of important things, and I liked the introduction of the Super Twins, although there's only one now.
Yeah.
But, well, kind of one. Anyway, so it was good. It was useful for what it was supposed to do. I think Ultron was one of the best one-off villains they've had. I think that he was very well developed. I think he got very creepy very quickly, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. He had a lot more meaning behind them than, say, the Chitauri. So he was a better villain in that sense, and I did enjoy it.
He is the only MCU villain to give children nightmares about strings. So, that is a well-deserved point. Marvel is renowned for doing one-off villains, and Ultron does seem to be one of the better ones.
Absolutely.
So, number 12 on the list, I have Black Panther. That's another one that people will not agree with. Black Panther did very well. In fact, the person opposite me is wearing a Black Panther shirt as we speak,
right.
So I imagine he will not have it at this spot.
Wakanda forever.
Right. So what do you have for number 12?
For number 12, I have Iron Man 2.
Okay.
Iron Man 2.
Why don't you go first?
All right. Iron Man 2. It is, for whatever reason, probably the Marvel movie that I have seen the most. And that doesn't make any sense, I know. But I have seen that movie quite a few times, and I still enjoy it. And I still think it's funny, even if it hasn't aged as well as it could have, maybe. But I think Justin Hammer's an interesting character in it. I don't mind the bird that is a recurring character as well. I don't mind Ivan. I think it's a good story. I think it's a very good self-contained story. It doesn't have a whole bunch of tie-in, but it does. It has Black Widow. It has different people, but I think it is really good as a standalone film. And even though it doesn't carry over very much into the other films, I think that it holds its own weight.
Okay. That's an interesting take, but I guess we'll talk about that later on. Black Panther I have at number 12 because, I enjoyed it. It was a really good movie. Many people say it was a great movie, and they're probably not wrong. It carried on well from what we had seen previously in Age of Ultron and in Civil War about Wakanda. And, we got to know a good amount of new characters in the film that were very well developed.
Hold up.
Shuri, Okoye, even M'Baku was a side character that had good development in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as Ross from the CIA. And unfortunately, Claw was dispatched in the movie. Don't think that isn't part of why it's lower on this list. I think they should have had Claw continue on in the MCU because, as we said, they have a problem with one-off villains.
Mm-hmm.
So Claw could have been that perfect guy to, start off your movie as, Doctor Strange is chasing Claw because he stole something from a museum or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll be like, I'll get out of prison again and wreak havoc or whatever. We need more than just Loki to do that. So I think they mismanaged Claw in that regard. Furthermore, Killmonger, while ideologically a very good villain, had a terrible plan. Because his plan from the beginning was to use Claw's body as a ticket into Wakanda, right? That's how he gets in. So why did he pull a job with Claw and then break him out instead of just killing him and taking him to the Wakandan border?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that. Someone please tell me the logic in that plan and teaming up with the guy that you're planning on killing in the first place. Anyway, it's a good movie. It's just, I think some of these other movies are a little bit better. And we might not have said before, but the criteria that I personally used for this was, is it a good movie? Is it a good Marvel movie? And entertainment value. And Black Panther certainly meets all of those to a degree. I just think some of these others tip the scales a little bit higher on those. I know I'm going to get hate for it, but that's where it is on my list.
All right. What did I say was next on my list?
Well, you talked about Iron Man 2
Oh, we
already.
started with Iron Man 2. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay, so number 11.
Yes, number 11. What do you have?
Well, I made it all the way up to number 11 with Ant-Man and the Wasp. And for me,
Really?
I think a lot of it is right after coming out of the theater, my first thought was, man, I like that a lot better than the first one, which evidently isn't true for everyone, but
No, after I saw it, I thought that. I think that about every Marvel movie right after I see it.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I thought that about Thor: The Dark World, but time proved me wrong.
I don't know if I ever thought that about Thor: The Dark World, but it was Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp, I liked the Wasp's character so much that it boosted the movie as a whole.
That's totally fair.
It pulled up Ant-Man from where I had it down at number 17 and brought it up to 11. So if one character can do that for you, it means a lot, obviously. I thought the humor was as well done as the first one anyway, and I thought the character development maybe was lacking overall, but it was still good enough. But it was a good movie. It was a solid movie, and I do agree with your comments from earlier. It was a little separated as far as the plot line goes, but still I enjoyed the different pieces of it that did come together.
Okay, that's totally fair. I agree completely about the Wasp. She was a great character, and I can't wait to see her in more MCU films. My number 11, if I didn't say before, is Doctor Strange. Now, I really, really liked this movie. It was something new. It was the first, well, that's not true, but it felt like the first origin movie that we had had in a while. Even though Ant-Man wasn't that far removed from it, it felt different because it was the first origin movie that we got in Phase 3. And so, at this point, being in Phase 3 and going back to the feeling of a Phase 1 film, but having all this experience of making these movies for so many years, I felt like it was really well done. The visuals in it are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And the story I appreciated a lot, mostly because the third act finale didn't go the way you would think. Usually it's some battle against a faceless CGI army, or a big sky beam comes up and you have to shut it down or something. But in this one, Stephen Strange uses his mind to outthink the villain, because you can't beat Dormammu. There's no way you can beat him, so you gotta outthink him. And that's exactly what he does with the Time Stone. And like 20 minutes before they said in the movie that it was the Time Stone, I guessed it right off the bat. And so I was very proud of that.
I'll talk about Doctor Strange later on in my list, but great movie. Really good. Like you said, has the feel of a first phase, even though it's so much later. And it did a very good job. I think it was one of the better ones that they had.
And you mentioned before about a movie working on its own, and Doctor Strange is very much a standalone movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can go in and not even know that it was attached to a Marvel movie until somewhere near the end, and you would be surprised. Maybe until the post-credit scene with Thor.
Right.
Would you not realize that it's an actual Marvel tie-in movie, if not for the Marvel logo at the beginning, I suppose. But yeah, it works on its own and works with everything else in the universe as well. So I think that's where we'll leave it for now before we get into the top 10 Marvel films. As we said, none of these, well, almost none of these movies are bad.
Right.
It's just that the ones that we've yet to talk about are great.
Correct.
So, let us know your rankings outside of the top 10 in the comments, and be sure to tune back in for the continuation to see which MCU movie is the best. Thanks for watching.